The town of Ashford Crossing had a way of forgetting people while they were still breathing. Mara Vance learned that truth early, the way you learn fire burns, through contact, through pain, through the kind of lesson that leaves scars nobody else can see. She was 17 years old, thin as a fence post, and had survived the last 9 months behind the collapsed frame of what used to be Morrison's Feed and Supply. The building had burned 3 years back. Nobody bothered to rebuild it, and nobody bothered to notice that someone was living in its shadow. She woke that morning to the sound of boots on hard-pan dirt and voices drifting through the skeletal walls. The sun hadn't cleared the horizon yet, but the town was already stirring, merchants opening shutters, the blacksmith's hammer starting its rhythm, the Wells Fargo coach rattling in from the overnight route. Mara lay still on her bedroll, a threadbare blanket pulled to her chin, listening. "Heard Rook's back," one voice said. "The hell's he doing here?" another replied. "Thought he'd stay gone after what happened." "Maybe he's finally come to his senses. Man can't raise a baby on his own." The voices faded. Mara sat up slowly, bones aching from the cold ground, and rubbed her arms. Her dress, if you could call it that, was a patchwork of repairs, the original fabric barely visible beneath the stitching. She'd scavenged the thread from a trash heap behind the tailor's shop, one strand at a time, over the course of months. The shoes on her feet had split soles. Her hands were rough, nails cracked and dirty, but her eyes were sharp. She folded the blanket with careful precision, tucked it into the corner of her makeshift shelter, and stepped out into the alley. The sky was a pale wash of gray and gold, the air crisp with the bite of early autumn. Mara moved through the shadows like she'd been taught by necessity, quietly, quickly, unnoticed. The town square was beginning to fill. She kept to the edges, slipping between buildings, avoiding eye contact. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The people of Ashford Crossing had a collective blindness when it came to Mara Vance. They didn't see her because they chose not to. She was a reminder of things they preferred to ignore: poverty, desperation, failure. She was the girl whose mother died in childbirth and whose father drank himself into the grave 2 years later. She was the girl the church ladies had tried to save with lectures and judgment before giving up entirely. She was the girl the county orphanage had turned away for being too old, too difficult, too much trouble. So she became invisible. Mara had learned to move through the world like smoke, present but intangible, seen but never acknowledged. She took work when she could find it, which was almost never. She ate what she could scavenge, which was almost nothing. And she endured because enduring was all she had left. She was making her way toward the back of the bakery, where day-old bread sometimes appeared in the trash bin, when she heard the commotion. It came from the direction of the church, a rising tide of voices, sharp and agitated. Mara paused, instinct pulling her toward the sound even as caution told her to stay away. Curiosity won. She edged closer, staying in the shadows, until she could see the small crowd gathered on the church steps. And there, in the center of it all, was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a face carved from stone and exhaustion. He wore a battered coat, dusty trousers, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles. But it was what he carried that made Mara's breath catch. A baby, wrapped in a stained blanket, tiny fists curled against a chest that rose and fell too quickly, too shallowly. Even from a distance, Mara could see the flush of fever on the infant's face. "Please," the man was saying, his voice rough and frayed. "She needs help. She needs—" "We can't, Mr. Rook." That was Mrs. Calloway, the preacher's wife, her face a mask of prim refusal. "It wouldn't be proper, you know that." "Proper?" The word came out like a curse. "She's dying." "Then you should have thought about that before—" Mrs. Calloway stopped herself, lips thinning. "Before you made the choices you made." Elias Rook, because that's who he was, Mara realized, the man the voices had mentioned earlier, stared at the woman like she'd struck him. His jaw worked, muscles tightening, but he said nothing. He just turned, cradling the baby closer, and walked down the steps. The crowd parted. He moved to the next house, knocked on the door. A woman answered, took one look at him, and shook her head before he could even speak. He tried again and again. Each door, the same result. Mara watched, something cold and familiar settling in her chest. She knew that look on his face, the dawning realization that no one was going to help, that he was alone, that the world had decided he didn't matter. She knew it because she wore it every single day. By the time Elias Rook reached the far end of the street, his movements had slowed. He wasn't begging anymore. He was just searching, desperate, lost. And then someone, a man Mara vaguely recognized as the stable hand, leaned in and said something to him, pointed. Elias Rook's head turned, and his eyes found the alley where Mara stood. She froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. He stared at her like he was trying to decide if she was real. She stared back, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she didn't. He crossed the street, walked straight toward her. The baby whimpered in his arms, a thin, broken sound that cut through the morning air. "You Mara Vance?" he asked when he was close enough. She nodded. Her voice felt stuck somewhere in her throat. He looked her over, taking in the ragged dress, the too thin frame, the dirt under her nails, and something shifted in his expression, not pity, not disgust, something harder to name. "They say you got nowhere to go," he said. "That true?" Another nod. "They say you're desperate enough to do just about anything for a meal and a roof." Mara's spine stiffened. "What are you asking?" Elias Rook's eyes dropped to the baby in his arms. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I need someone to keep her alive." Mara blinked. "What?" "My daughter." He shifted the blanket so Mara could see the infant's face fully, red, crumpled, slick with sweat. "Her name's Lily. Her mother died 5 weeks ago. I've been trying to keep her fed, keep her breathing, but I don't—" His voice cracked. "I don't know what I'm doing, and she's getting worse. I'm not a—" Mara stopped herself. "I don't know anything about babies. Neither do I." "Then why—" "Because you're the only one who'll say yes." The words landed like a punch. Mara stared at him, this stranger, this man who'd been turned away by every decent, respectable, capable woman in town. And now he was standing in front of her, Mara Vance, the invisible girl, the one nobody wanted, asking her to save his child's life. It was insane. It was impossible. And yet, "What do you want me to do?" she heard herself ask. Elias Rook exhaled, something like relief flickering across his face. "Come with me. Just try. That's all I'm asking. Try to keep her alive." "For how long?" "Tonight, maybe longer. I don't know." He looked at her directly, and there was no pretense in his gaze. "I can pay you. Not much, but food, shelter, whatever I've got." Mara thought about the cold ground she'd slept on last night. The gnawing ache in her stomach that never really went away. The way the townspeople looked through her like she was made of glass. She thought about the baby in his arms, dying because the world had decided her father didn't deserve help. "All right," she said quietly. Elias Rook blinked, like he hadn't actually expected her to agree. "All right? I'll try." He nodded once, sharp and final. "Get your things." Mara almost laughed. Things, as if she had things. But she turned and walked back to her shelter, grabbed the blanket and the small cloth sack that held everything she owned, a spare shirt, a tin cup, a piece of flint, and returned to where he waited. "That's it?" he asked, looking at the bundle in her arms. "That's it." He studied her for a moment longer, then jerked his head toward the edge of town. "My horse is this way." They walked in silence. The sun was fully up now, spilling gold across the rutted street. People were starting to notice, heads turning, whispers spreading. Mara kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at them. She could feel their stares, their judgment, the weight of their disdain. Let them stare. Elias Rook's horse was a sturdy bay mare, tied to a post near the livery. He loaded Mara's things into the saddlebag, then turned to her. "You ever ridden before?" "No." He hesitated, then made a decision. "You'll have to hold her." He handed the baby to Mara before she could protest. The weight of the child settled into her arms, impossibly light and impossibly heavy all at once. Lily stirred, whimpering, her small face scrunched in discomfort. Mara looked down at her, panic flaring. "I don't—" "Just hold her steady," Elias said, swinging up into the saddle. He reached down. "Give me your hand." Mara shifted the baby to one arm and extended her hand. His grip was strong, calloused, and he pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. She landed awkwardly, clutching Lily against her chest, her free hand grabbing at Elias's coat for balance. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the mare into motion. They left Ashford Crossing at a trot, the town shrinking behind them as the landscape opened up into rolling hills and sparse trees. Mara had never been this far outside the town limits. She'd never had a reason to. Now, sitting behind a stranger on a horse, holding a dying baby, she realized how small her world had been, how small she'd let it become. The ride was long and brutal. The sun climbed higher, turning the air hot and dry. Mara's arms ached from holding Lily, her legs burned from gripping the horse's flanks, and her head swam with exhaustion. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. Elias Rook didn't speak. He just rode, his back rigid, his focus absolute. It was late afternoon when they finally reached the cabin. It sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by scrub brush and dust, a simple structure of weathered wood and a sagging porch. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, lazy line. Elias dismounted and reached up to take Lily from Mara's arms, then helped her down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. She caught herself on the horse's flank, breathing hard. "You all right?" Elias asked. "Fine," she lied. He didn't press, just turned and carried Lily toward the cabin. Mara followed, every step an effort. Inside, the cabin was sparse. One room, a fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a narrow bed in the corner. Elias laid Lily on the bed, unwrapping the blanket with surprising gentleness. The baby was worse than Mara had realized. Her skin was flushed and hot to the touch, her breathing rapid and shallow. She barely moved. "What do I do?" Mara asked, her voice small. Elias turned to her, and for the first time she saw the full weight of his fear. "I don't know," he said. And that, more than anything, terrified her. The first hour was chaos. Mara had no plan, no knowledge, no tools. All she had was instinct and a stubborn refusal to let this child die in front of her. She sent Elias to fetch water from the well outside, while she stripped Lily down to her thin underclothes, trying to cool the fever. The baby cried. Weak, pitiful sounds that tore at something deep in Mara's chest. "It's okay," she whispered, though she had no idea if that was true. "You're okay." Elias returned with a bucket of water. Mara soaked a cloth and began to sponge Lily's burning skin, working quickly, methodically. The baby flinched and wailed, but Mara didn't stop. "She needs to eat," Elias said, standing at the foot of the bed. "She hasn't eaten since this morning." "What does she eat?" "Milk. I've been trying to get her to take goat's milk from a rag, but she won't. She can't. Do you have any?" He nodded and moved to the corner of the room where a small pail sat covered with a cloth. He brought it over, along with a clean strip of fabric. Mara dipped the cloth into the milk, wrung it out slightly, and brought it to Lily's lips. The baby turned her head away, whimpering. "Come on," Mara murmured. "Please." She tried again and again. Each time, Lily refused, her tiny mouth clamped shut, her body too weak to fight, but too stubborn to give in. Frustration clawed at Mara's throat. She looked up at Elias, who stood watching with an expression of helpless anguish. "She's going to starve," he said quietly. "No," Mara said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "She's not." She tried a different approach, dabbing the milk onto Lily's lips, letting it sit there, waiting. The baby's tongue flickered out, tasting, and for a moment Mara thought she might take it. But then Lily turned away again, crying weakly. Mara's hands trembled. She set the cloth down and pressed her palms to her thighs, trying to steady herself. "Maybe," Elias began, then stopped. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing." "Say it." "Maybe it's too late." Mara looked at him, then back at the baby. Lily's chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Her eyes were closed, her face slack. It would be easy to give up, to say she'd tried, to walk away. But Mara Vance had spent her entire life being told she didn't matter, that she wasn't worth the effort, that she was too much trouble, and she'd be damned if she let this baby hear the same thing. "It's not too late," she said. Elias watched her, something unreadable in his eyes. Mara picked up the cloth again, soaked it in milk, and brought it back to Lily's lips. She didn't rush this time, didn't force it. She just waited, patient and still, until the baby's instincts took over. And finally, Lily latched on. It wasn't much, just a few drops, but it was something. Mara exhaled, relief flooding through her. She looked up at Elias, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something like hope in his face. "Keep going," he said softly. So she did. Night fell, and with it came a cold that seeped through the cabin walls like water. Elias built up the fire while Mara continued her work, alternating between cooling Lily's fever and coaxing milk into her mouth, drop by agonizing drop. The baby fought her, cried, refused. But Mara didn't stop. Somewhere around midnight, exhaustion hit her like a landslide. Her vision blurred, her hands shook, and her back screamed in protest from hours of leaning over the bed. She swayed, catching herself on the edge of the mattress. "You need to rest," Elias said. He was sitting at the table, watching her. "I'm fine." "You're not." She needs you to not collapse," he interrupted. "Sit down. Eat something." Mara wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She sank onto the bench at the table, legs trembling. Elias set a plate in front of her. Bread, cheese, a piece of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd eaten in days. She ate mechanically, barely tasting it, her eyes never leaving the bed where Lily lay. "Why are you doing this?" Elias asked after a while. Mara looked at him. "You asked me to." That's not an answer. She considered the question, turning it over in her mind. Why was she doing this? For the food? The shelter? Because she had nothing else? No. Because nobody else would, she said finally. Elias's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded crossing his face. He looked away, jaw tight. Her mother would have hated this, he said quietly. Hated that I had to, that I couldn't. He trailed off, and Mara didn't push. She didn't need to know the whole story. She could see it in the way he moved around the cabin, careful, deliberate, like he was trying not to disturb a ghost. "She must have been a good person," Mara offered. Elias laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "She was better than me. That's for damn sure." Silence settled between them. Mara finished her meal and stood, swaying slightly. "I'm going back to her," she said. Elias nodded. "I'll keep the fire going." Mara returned to the bed, to the baby who was still breathing, still fighting. She picked up the cloth, soaked it in fresh water, and resumed her vigil. Hours blurred together. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. And Mara Vance, the invisible girl, the one nobody saw, kept a dying baby alive through sheer, stubborn will. Dawn broke pale and cold, light spilling through the cabin's single window in a wash of gray. Mara blinked, realizing with a start that she'd fallen asleep sitting up, her head resting on the edge of the bed. She jerked upright, panic flooding her chest. Lily. The baby lay still, so still, and for one horrifying moment, Mara thought, but then Lily's eyes opened, slowly, heavily, like waking from a deep sleep. And her breathing. It was slower, steadier. The fever had broken. Mara stared, afraid to believe it. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched Lily's forehead. Cool. Not cold, not burning, just normal. "Oh," Mara whispered. "Oh, thank—" A sound behind her made her turn. Elias stood in the doorway, freshly returned from outside, snow dusting his shoulders. He looked at Mara, then at the baby, and something in his face cracked open. She's okay," Mara said, her voice breaking on the words. I think she's going to be okay." Elias crossed the room in 3 strides. He knelt beside the bed, reaching out to touch his daughter's hand. Lily's tiny fingers curled around his, and he let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for weeks. "You did it," he said, looking up at Mara. "You actually did it." Mara shook her head. You didn't give up." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mara met his gaze and saw something there she hadn't expected. Gratitude, respect, and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Stay," Elias said suddenly. Mara blinked. "What?" "Stay, here, with us." He glanced at Lily, then back at Mara. She needs you. He stopped, then tried again. I can't do this alone. And you're good at this. I'm not, Mara protested. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I, Elias said. But we figured it out, didn't we? Mara looked at the baby, at Lily, who was watching her with wide, dark eyes, so alive, so present, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone needed her, not out of desperation, not because she was the last option, but because she'd proven she could do this, because she mattered. Okay, she said softly. I'll stay. Elias nodded, relief washing over his features. Thank you. And Mara Vance, who had spent her entire life being invisible, finally understood what it felt like to be seen. What? The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Mara learned Lily's rhythms, when she was hungry, when she needed to sleep, when the fever threatened to return and had to be fought back with cool water and patience. She learned how to wrap the baby snugly in blankets, how to rock her when she cried, how to coax her into eating even when she didn't want to. Elias, for his part, took care of everything else. He hunted, he hauled water, he kept the fire burning. He was quiet, watchful, but not unkind. Sometimes Mara would catch him watching her with Lily, his expression unreadable. She wondered what he saw. A week passed, then 2. And then, one morning, Elias announced they needed to go back to town for supplies. Mara's stomach dropped. I can stay here. No, Elias said firmly. You're coming with us. They don't want to see me. I don't care what they want. His tone left no room for argument. So Mara bundled Lily in blankets, climbed onto the horse behind Elias, and they rode back to Ashford Crossing. The town greeted them with stares. Elias ignored them, tying the horse outside the general store and taking Lily from Mara's arms. They walked inside together, and the conversation stopped. Mrs. Calloway was at the counter. Her eyes widened when she saw them. Mr. Rook, she said stiffly, I see the child survived. She did, Elias said. No thanks to you. The woman's face flushed. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm sure you do. Elias set a list on the counter. I need these supplies. Mrs. Calloway's gaze flicked to Mara, standing just behind him. Her expression curdled. Is that her? Her name is Mara, Elias said coldly, and she's the reason my daughter is alive. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Mrs. Calloway's mouth opened, then closed. She turned and began gathering the items on the list without another word. Mara stood frozen, heart pounding, waiting for someone to say something, to tell her to leave, to call her names, to remind her that she didn't belong. But Elias's presence was a wall between her and them, solid, unyielding. When the supplies were packed and paid for, he turned to Mara. Let's go. They walked out together, and Mara felt the weight of 100 eyes on her back. But for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt defended. That night, back at the cabin, Mara fed Lily and tucked her into the small cradle Elias had built. The baby cooed softly, her eyes drifting closed, and Mara felt that now familiar tug in her chest. Love. She was falling in love with this child. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in years. She's getting stronger, Elias said from the table. Mara turned. She is. Because of you. She shook her head. We both been— No, Elias interrupted. You. I couldn't have done this without you. Mara didn't know what to say to that. So she just nodded. Elias stood, crossing to the window. He looked out at the dark landscape, his shoulders tense. The town's going to talk, he said quietly. About you being here. About us. I know. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Mara joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body in the cold air. I don't care what they think, she said. Elias looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. You mean that? I do. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Mara saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. Then neither do I, he said. And in that moment, Mara understood that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white silence. Mara woke to the sound of Lily fussing in her cradle, the pale light of dawn filtering through frost-covered windows. She rose quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and lifted the baby into her arms. "Shh," she whispered, settling into the rocking chair Elias had dragged in from the barn 2 weeks prior. "I've got you." Lily quieted almost immediately, her small hand grasping at Mara's finger. The baby was thriving now, cheeks fuller, eyes brighter, her cries stronger and more demanding. She'd nearly doubled in weight since that first terrible night, and every ounce felt like a victory Mara had fought for with her own hands. Elias stirred on his bedroll near the fireplace. He'd given Mara the bed without discussion, insisting she needed proper rest if she was going to keep caring for Lily. At first she'd protested, but he'd simply walked outside and slept in the barn until she agreed. The man was stubborn as winter itself. "She wake you?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "I was already awake." He sat up, running a hand through his hair. In the growing light, Mara could see the changes in him too. The tension in his shoulders had eased somewhat. The hard lines around his mouth softened. He no longer looked like a man barely holding himself together. "I'll start the fire," he said, standing and moving toward the hearth. They'd developed their own rhythm over the past month, a careful dance of domestic routine. Elias would wake first, build up the fire, and head out to tend the animals while Mara fed Lily and started breakfast. They'd eat together in comfortable silence, then he'd disappear for hours, hunting, repairing fences, chopping wood, while Mara kept the cabin warm and the baby content. Evenings were spent in quiet companionship, Elias whittling or mending tools while Mara sang soft songs to Lily. It was a life. Simple, hard, but real. More real than anything Mara had ever known. "Storm's coming," Elias said, peering out the window as he fed kindling to the flames. "Big one. By the look of those clouds." Mara joined him at the window, Lily still in her arms. The sky to the north was a bruised purple-gray, heavy and threatening. "How long do we have?" "Day, maybe 2. He glanced at her. "I need to ride into town, get supplies before it hits. Extra flour, salt, lamp oil." Mara's stomach tightened. Every trip to town was an ordeal. The stares, the whispers, the way people fell silent when they approached. Mrs. Calloway's pursed lips. The blacksmith's pointed commentary about improper arrangements. The constant grinding judgment that followed them like a shadow. "I can stay here with Lily," she offered. Elias turned to face her fully. "That what you want? It's easier." "Easier isn't always better." Mara looked down at the baby, avoiding his gaze. "They hate me, Elias. They think I don't care what they think. But I do." The admission came out smaller than she intended. "I care that they look at you like you've done something shameful, that they treat you different because of me." Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady and certain. "Let them look. Let them talk. You saved my daughter's life when every one of those righteous folks slammed their doors in my face. That's what matters. That's all that matters." Mara met his eyes and saw no doubt there, no hesitation, just that same solid certainty that had kept her grounded through every difficult day. "Come with me," he said. "Both of you. We face them together." So she did. They rode into Ashford Crossing under a sky heavy with unspilled snow, Lily bundled in blankets against Mara's chest. The town square was busy despite the weather, people rushing to prepare for the storm, loading wagons, hammering boards over windows. The moment they dismounted, the whispers started. "That's her." Shameless. Poor child, raised by the likes of that. Mara kept her eyes forward, her chin up. Elias walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, Lily secure in her arms. They made their way to the general store, and conversations died like candles in wind. Mr. Brennan, the shopkeeper, stood behind the counter, his expression carefully neutral. He was one of the few who didn't openly sneer at Mara, though she suspected that had more to do with not wanting to lose Elias's business than any actual goodwill. "Mr. Rook," he said with a nod. "Miss Vance." The acknowledgement of her name, her actual name, startled Mara so much she nearly fumbled her grip on Lily. Need supplies, Elias said, setting a list on the counter. Everything on there, plus an extra 20 pounds of flour and another tin of lamp oil. Brennan scanned the list, his eyebrows rising. Expecting to be snowed in for a while? Rather be prepared. Smart thinking. Brennan moved to gather the items, and Mara allowed herself to breathe, but the peace didn't last. The door opened with a sharp jingle, and Mrs. Calloway swept in, followed by two other church ladies Mara vaguely recognized. They stopped short when they saw Elias and Mara. "Mr. Rook," Mrs. Calloway said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise." "Mrs. Calloway." Elias's voice was flat, uninterested. The woman's eyes slid to Mara, then to the baby in her arms. Something calculating moved behind her expression. "And how is the little one? Growing well, I hope." "She's fine," Mara said quietly. "I'm so glad to hear it." Mrs. Calloway stepped closer, and Mara fought the urge to back away. "You know, Mr. Rook, the ladies and I have been discussing your situation." "Have you?" "We're concerned. A child needs a proper home, proper influences. A mother who—" "She has a mother," Elias interrupted, his voice hard as iron. Mrs. Calloway blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me." The woman's face flushed. "Mr. Rook, surely you don't mean— This girl is not— This girl," Elias said, his words deliberate and cutting, "kept my daughter alive when every single one of you turned your backs. She's fed her, cared for her, sat up with her through fevers and colic and every hard night. So yes, Mrs. Calloway, she's Lily's mother, more than any of you could ever claim to be." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Mr. Brennan had stopped moving, frozen with a sack of flour in his hands. Mrs. Calloway's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. "This is an outrage, an absolute outrage. The moral implications alone— The only outrage," Elias said, leaning forward slightly, "is that a man had to beg strangers for help with his dying child. And the only person with enough decency to say yes was the one you all pretend doesn't exist." He straightened, took the bundled supplies from Brennan, and dropped coins on the counter. "Let's go," he said to Mara. She followed him out, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Behind them, she heard Mrs. Calloway's scandalized voice rising, but the words blurred together, meaningless. Outside, Elias loaded the supplies onto the horse with sharp, precise movements. His jaw was tight, his hands steady despite the anger radiating off him like heat. "Elias," Mara began. "Don't." He paused, then looked at her. "Don't apologize. Don't tell me I shouldn't have said it. I meant every word." Mara swallowed hard. "I wasn't going to apologize." His expression softened slightly. "No? I was going to say thank you." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a recognition. Mara had spent her whole life being invisible, being told she didn't matter, and Elias had just stood in front of the entire town and declared her essential. He nodded once, then turned back to the horse. "We should go. Storm's getting closer." They rode home through the first lazy snowflakes, Lily sleeping peacefully against Mara's chest, and Mara felt something she'd never felt before. Protected. The storm hit that night with a vengeance. Wind howled around the cabin, driving snow against the walls in great gusting sheets. Elias had prepared well. The woodpile was stocked, the animals secured in the barn, every crack and gap sealed against the cold. Inside, the fire burned bright and warm. Mara sat in the rocking chair, mending one of Lily's tiny gowns, while Elias worked on repairing a broken harness at the table. The baby slept in her cradle, oblivious to the fury outside. "Probably be snowed in for a week at least," Elias said without looking up from his work. "That going to be a problem?" "Not if the supplies hold. Might get a little monotonous, though." Mara smiled faintly. "I've had worse." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I know you have." The storm raged on. Hours passed. Eventually, Elias stood and stretched, his joints popping. "I'm going to check the barn one more time, make sure nothing's come loose." "In this?" Mara gestured toward the window, where snow was piling up against the glass. "Won't take long. Animals need to know someone's looking after them." He pulled on his heavy coat and disappeared into the howling white. Mara watched the door close behind him, then turned her attention back to Lily. The baby had started making small sounds in her sleep, little coos and whimpers that Mara had learned to interpret. She was dreaming. Mara set aside her mending and lifted Lily from the cradle, settling back into the rocking chair. The baby nuzzled against her, still asleep, and Mara began to hum, an old melody she barely remembered, something her own mother had sung to her before the world fell apart. When Elias returned 15 minutes later, stamping snow from his boots, he found them like that, Mara rocking gently, Lily curled against her chest, both bathed in firelight. He stopped in the doorway, just watching. "She settle?" he asked finally. "Always does. Eventually." Mara looked up at him. "Everything all right out there?" "All secure." He hung up his coat and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "She's lucky to have you." "I think I'm the lucky one." Elias turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You ever think about before? About going back?" Mara knew what he was asking. Back to Ashford Crossing. Back to sleeping behind burned buildings and scrounging for scraps. "No," she said simply. "Nothing there for me." "What about family, friends?" "Never had either." He was quiet for a moment. "That why you said yes that day? Because you had nothing to lose?" Mara considered the question, really considered it. "Maybe at first, but not anymore." "What changed?" She looked down at Lily, at the small, perfect face slack with sleep. "I have something worth keeping now." Elias's expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable crossing his features before he looked away. "So do I." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of howling wind and endless white, of small routines and careful conversation. They played cards in the evening, Elias teaching Mara games she'd never learned. They took turns reading aloud from the few books he owned, a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, a book of frontier tales, a farmer's almanac. And they talked, really talked, in a way Mara had never talked to anyone. She told him about her parents, her mother dying in childbirth, her father drinking himself into an early grave, about the church ladies who tried to save her soul while looking down their noses at her poverty, about the years spent invisible, moving through the world like a ghost. He told her about Emily, Lily's mother, how they'd met, how she'd died, the guilt that ate at him for not being there, for failing to protect her, the terror of those first weeks alone with a newborn, not knowing what to do, watching her slip away and feeling utterly powerless. "I failed her," he said one night, staring into the fire. "Emily, I failed her." "No," Mara said firmly. "You didn't. She died alone while I was—" "You can't control everything, Elias. Sometimes bad things just happen." He looked at her, his eyes haunted. "How do you live with that?" "You keep going. You take care of what's in front of you. You don't give up." She paused. "You taught me that." "I didn't teach you anything." "You did. You showed me what it looks like when someone doesn't quit, when they keep fighting even when everything's falling apart." Elias shook his head slowly. "I was ready to quit that day in town. If you'd said no, but I didn't." "Why?" Mara thought about that moment when this stranger had stood in front of her with a dying baby and asked the impossible. "Because you saw me," she said quietly. "For the first time in my life, someone actually saw me." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had finally started to ease. Elias reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, and Mara felt her breath catch. "I see you," he said. "Every day. I see you." Mara's throat tightened. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, the fire burning low, while outside the storm finally began to break. On the 6th day, the sun came out. Mara opened the cabin door to a world transformed. Snow piled 4 feet deep in places. Icicles hanging from the eaves like crystal daggers, the whole valley gleaming white and pristine under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "Beautiful," she breathed. Elias came to stand beside her, Lily in his arms. The baby's eyes went wide at the brightness, her small mouth forming an O of surprise. "First real snow she's seen," he said softly. They stood together in the doorway, 3 people who'd become something like a family. watching the sunlight glitter on fresh snow. And then Mara saw them. 3 riders, making their way up the valley toward the cabin. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead horse, a tall black gelding that belonged to Mayor Thornton. "Elias," she said, her voice tight. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Stay inside." "What do they want?" "Nothing good." He handed Lily to her. "Keep her in the cabin. No matter what happens, you stay inside with her." "Elias, promise me." Mara looked at him, saw the fear beneath the anger, and nodded. "I promise." He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Mara moved to the window. Lily clutched against her chest and watched. The riders approached slowly, their horses struggling through the deep snow. Mayor Thornton was flanked by Sheriff Davies and another man Mara didn't recognize, someone official-looking, carrying a leather satchel. They stopped a dozen yards from the cabin. Elias stood on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. "Mr. Rook," the mayor called out, "we need to talk." "So talk." Thornton dismounted, gesturing for the others to do the same. "Maybe we should step inside. It's cold out here. You can say whatever you came to say right where you're standing." The mayor's jaw tightened. "Very well. We've come on behalf of the town council. There's been concerns raised about the child." Mara's blood went cold. "What kind of concerns?" Elias asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The sheriff cleared his throat. "About her welfare, Rook. About whether this is a proper environment for a baby." "Proper." "You're living alone with a woman who saved my daughter's life," Elias interrupted. "Who's been caring for her for weeks while you all did nothing?" "That's not the point," Mayor Thornton said. "The point is propriety, decency. A child needs to be fed and warm and loved, all of which she is." The third man spoke up, his voice officious. "Mr. Rook, my name is Harold Finch. I'm with the Territorial Child Welfare Board. I've been asked to assess the situation here and determine whether alternative arrangements might be in the child's best interest." Mara's hands began to shake. Through the window, she could see Elias's shoulders tense. "Alternative arrangements," he repeated flatly. "A proper family," Finch said. "The Weatherbys in town have expressed interest in—" "No." "Mr. Rook, you need to consider what's best for—" "I said no." Elias took a step forward. "My daughter stays with me. With us." "Is the woman even qualified?" the sheriff demanded. "Has she got any experience with children? Any references? Hell, has she got a clean record?" "Her record is that she kept a dying baby alive when no one else would try." "That good enough for you?" Mayor Thornton raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Elias, please, we're not trying to take your daughter away. We just want to ensure she has the best possible—" "You want to make yourselves feel better about turning your backs on us. That's what this is about." "This is about doing what's right," Finch said firmly, "and I'm afraid I'm going to have to insist on seeing the child, assessing the living conditions. It's procedure." "No. I have the authority." "I don't care what authority you have. You're not coming in my house. You're not touching my daughter." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Mara could barely breathe, her heart slamming against her ribs. Lily squirmed in her arms, sensing the tension. Sheriff Davies' hand moved toward his belt. "Rook, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "You want to make it hard?" Elias's voice dropped to something cold and lethal. "You try to take her, and I will make it impossible." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Inside the cabin, Mara made a decision. She shifted Lily to one arm, opened the door, and stepped out onto the porch. All 4 men turned to look at her. "Miss Vance," Mayor Thornton said, something like satisfaction in his voice, "perhaps you can be reasonable about this." Mara walked forward until she stood beside Elias, close enough to feel the tension radiating from him, to draw strength from his presence. "Reasonable about what?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "About what's best for the child." "I know what's best for her. She needs her father. She needs her home. She needs—" Mara's voice caught, but she pushed through. "She needs to be loved, and she is." Finch stepped forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Miss Vance, I'm sure you mean well, but you have to understand how this looks. An unmarried woman living with a widower caring for his child. The implications, Mara said, finding her courage in the weight of Lily against her chest, are that a baby would have died if I hadn't been here. That's all that matters. Society has standards. Society has judgments, she interrupted. And I've been on the receiving end my whole life, so has Elias. But we're still here, still standing, still taking care of this child. So you can take your standards and your implications and… Mara, Elias said quietly, touching her arm. She stopped, breathless, shaking. The mayor and sheriff exchanged glances. Finch opened his satchel, pulling out papers. I'm afraid I'm going to have to file a formal report, he said. Recommend a full investigation. In the meantime, Elias said, his voice cutting, you're going to get off my property, all of you, before I give you a reason to come back with more than papers. Mr. Rook, now. The word cracked like a whip. The three men stood frozen for a moment, then began backing toward their horses. This isn't over, Finch warned. We'll be back, with proper authority. Looking forward to it. They mounted up, wheeled their horses around, and rode off down the valley. Mara and Elias stood watching until they disappeared into the white landscape. Then Elias turned to her. You shouldn't have come out, he said. I couldn't just hide. They saw you. They saw you with Lily. That's going to make things worse. I don't care. Mara looked up at him, her eyes fierce. Let them see. Let them know exactly who's been taking care of her, who loves her. Elias stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and cupped her face with one rough hand. You're braver than you know, he said quietly. Mara's breath caught. They stood like that, inches apart, the baby between them, and for a heartbeat she thought, but Elias dropped his hand and stepped back. We need to prepare, he said, his voice rough. They'll be back, and next time they'll bring more than words. Mara nodded, swallowing hard against the ache in her chest. They went inside together, closing the door against the cold and the threat and the world that wanted to tear them apart. And Mara held Lily close, whispering promises she had no idea how to keep. The waiting was worse than the confrontation itself. 3 days passed, then 4, and the threat of the men's return hung over the cabin like an axe waiting to fall. Elias barely slept, spending his nights sitting by the window with his rifle across his knees, watching the valley for movement. During the day, he was restless, pacing, checking and rechecking the perimeter, his jaw tight with tension. Mara tried to maintain their routine for Lily's sake. She fed the baby, sang to her, played little games that made Lily gurgle with delight. But even the child seemed to sense something was wrong, fussing more than usual, reaching for Mara with urgent little hands whenever she tried to set her down. She knows, Mara said one afternoon, rocking Lily against her chest. Somehow she knows. Elias looked up from where he was cleaning his rifle at the table. Babies are smarter than people give them credit for. What are we going to do when they come back? Keep them out. Keep her safe. He set down the cleaning rag, his expression grim. Whatever it takes. Mara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. You can't fight the law, Elias. Watch me. They'll take her. They'll take you too, throw you in jail for resisting. Then what do you suggest? His voice was sharp, edged with desperation. Let them walk in here and take my daughter? Hand her over to strangers? No, I'm saying, Mara struggled to find the words. I'm saying we need to be smarter than them, not just stronger. Elias stared at her, then slowly set the rifle aside. What are you thinking? Mara looked down at Lily, at the baby who'd become everything to her in a few short weeks. They said the problem was propriety, that we're not proper. So maybe we give them what they want. Make it proper. Understanding dawned in Elias's eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. Mara, not a real marriage, she said quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. Just on paper, legal. So they can't say she doesn't have a proper home, proper parents. You'd do that? For her? Yes. Mara met his gaze steadily. Wouldn't you? Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. It wouldn't just be on paper, you know. It would be real enough. Your name, your future, everything tied to me. to this. My future was sleeping behind a burned building and starving. This is already better. You deserve more than better than starving. The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. Mara blinked hard, forcing back the sudden sting of tears. Maybe, she said quietly, but this is what I have, and I'm not letting them take it away. Before Elias could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley. They both froze, eyes meeting in shared alarm. Elias grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, while Mara instinctively backed toward the far wall, Lily clutched tight. But it wasn't Mayor Thornton or Sheriff Davies. It was a single rider on a gray horse, moving slowly through the snow. As they drew closer, Mara recognized the horse. It belonged to Doc Morrison, the town physician. "It's the doc," Elias said, tension easing fractionally from his shoulders. "Alone?" "Looks like it." They watched as Morrison dismounted, tied his horse to the porch rail, and climbed the steps. His knock was firm but not aggressive. Elias opened the door, rifle still in hand. "Doc." "Elias." Morrison's eyes flicked to the weapon, then to Mara and the baby behind him. "Mind if I come in? It's cold as hell out here." Elias hesitated, then stepped aside. Morrison entered, stamping snow from his boots, and removed his hat. He was a weathered man in his 60s, with kind eyes and steady hands that had delivered half the babies in the territory, including Lily. "I'm not here on official business," he said immediately, raising his hands, "and I'm alone. You can put the rifle down." Elias lowered the weapon but didn't set it aside. "Then why are you here?" Morrison's gaze moved to Mara. "Heard what happened. The council's visit, Finch's report." He paused. "Thought you should know what's coming." "More threats?" Elias asked flatly. "Worse. They're planning to come back with a court order. Take the baby into protective custody pending a formal hearing." Mara's legs nearly gave out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, holding Lily so tight the baby squeaked in protest. "When?" Elias demanded. 3 days, maybe 4. Finch had to ride to the territorial capital to file the papers. Morrison looked between them. "They're serious about this, Elias. They've got the Weatherbys lined up, respectable family, money, connections. Judge Mitchell is already leaning their way." "Mitchell owes his position to Mayor Thornton," Elias said bitterly. "That he does." Morrison pulled out a chair and sat without invitation. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. You can't win this fight with guns and stubbornness. They've got the law on their side and the community backing them. You need something stronger than defiance." "Like what?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison looked at her directly. "Legitimacy. Make it impossible for them to question your fitness as parents." "We're not," Mara started, then stopped. "Not married, I know." Morrison leaned forward. "But you could be. Quick ceremony, filed with the county, all legal and proper. Take away their ammunition." "That's what she said," Elias muttered, glancing at Mara. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "She's a smart woman. You should listen to her." "It feels like running," Elias said, "like letting them win." "It's not running if you're protecting what matters." Morrison stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll perform the ceremony myself if you want. Tonight, if you're willing. Get the paperwork filed before they can move against you." Elias looked at Mara. She looked back, Lily warm and alive in her arms, and knew what her answer had to be. "Tonight," she said. Morrison nodded, satisfied. "I'll be back at sundown. Bring a witness if you can find one." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I've seen how she is with that baby. Seen how you both are. What you're doing here. It's more real than half the proper marriages in that town." After he left, the cabin fell into heavy silence. Elias set the rifle down and sank into a chair, running both hands through his hair. "You sure about this?" he asked without looking at her. "Are you?" "I asked first." Mara stood, swaying Lily gently. "I'm sure I want her to stay here. With us. If this is what it takes, then yes, I'm sure." Elias finally looked at her, his eyes searching. "It's going to change things." "Things are already changed." "Not like this." Mara knew what he meant. A piece of paper declaring them husband and wife would make official what had already become true in practice. They were partners in this, bound together by circumstance and necessity, and something neither of them was quite ready to name. "I know," she said softly, "but I'd rather have things change this way than lose her." Elias nodded slowly, decision settling over his features. "Then we do it, tonight." The hours until sundown passed in a strange, suspended state. Mara bathed Lily and dressed her in the cleanest gown they had. She changed her own dress, brushing out her hair for the first time in weeks, her hands shaking slightly. It wasn't a real wedding, she told herself. Just a legal formality, nothing to be nervous about. But her heart hammered anyway. Elias cleaned himself up too, shaving for the first time since she'd met him, revealing the strong lines of his jaw. He put on his best shirt, still worn, still patched, but clean, and stood awkwardly in the center of the cabin like he didn't know what to do with himself. "You look nice," Mara said, then immediately felt foolish. "So do you." His voice was gruff, but his eyes were gentle. Doc Morrison arrived as the sun touched the horizon, painting the snow gold and pink. With him came an unexpected guest, Samuel Chen, who ran the mercantile on the outskirts of town. He was a quiet man, one of the few who'd never treated Mara with open contempt. "Needed a witness," Morrison explained. "Sam here volunteered." Chen nodded to them both. Seemed like the right thing to do. They gathered in front of the fireplace, Lily drowsing in Mara's arms. Morrison pulled a small book from his coat. A Bible, Mara realized with a start, though he made no religious ceremony of it, simply using it as a legal reference. "This doesn't have to be complicated," Morrison said. "I'll ask you both the necessary questions. You say yes. I pronounce you married under territorial law. Sam here will sign as witness, and I'll file the papers in town tomorrow." "That's it?" Elias asked. "That's it, unless you want me to make it fancy." "No," they both said at once. Morrison almost smiled. "All right then. Elias Rook, do you take Mara Vance as your lawfully wedded wife, to care for and provide for as long as you both shall live?" Elias looked at Mara, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what they were really promising. Not love, not romance, but something perhaps more fundamental: partnership, loyalty, survival. "I do," he said. "Mara Vance, do you take Elias Rook as your lawfully wedded husband, to care for and support as long as you both shall live?" Mara thought about the girl she'd been 2 months ago, invisible, forgotten, barely surviving. Then she looked at the baby in her arms, at the man who'd given her purpose and protection and a place to belong. "I do," she whispered. "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Morrison closed the book. "You can kiss if you want, but it's not required." An awkward silence fell. Elias shifted his weight, looking uncertain. Mara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Then Lily chose that moment to wake up and let out a demanding wail, shattering the tension. "Well," Morrison said with a chuckle, "that's as good a blessing as any. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Rook." Mrs. Rook. The name settled over Mara like a cloak, strange and unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. They signed the papers, Mara's hand shaking as she wrote her new name for the first time. Chen signed below. Morrison notarized everything with his official seal, and just like that, it was done. "I'll get these filed first thing," Morrison said, tucking the documents into his coat. "By the time Finch gets back with his court order, you'll be a legally married couple with every right to raise your daughter. Should take the wind out of their sails." "Should?" Mara asked. "Nothing's guaranteed, but it'll make their case a hell of a lot harder to argue." He paused at the door. "They'll still come, still try to find fault. You need to be ready for that." "We will be," Elias said firmly. After Morrison and Chen left, the cabin felt suddenly too small and too large all at once. Mara busied herself settling Lily for the night while Elias stood by the window, staring out at the darkening valley. "You take the bed," he said finally. "I'll sleep by the fire like always." "Elias, we're married now. People will expect—" "I don't care what people expect." He turned to face her. "This was for Lily, to protect her. It doesn't mean you owe me anything." The careful distance in his voice stung more than Mara wanted to admit. "I know that." "Do you?" He crossed to stand in front of her. "Because I need you to understand, I won't expect you to be anything other than what you've been. This changes the law, not us." Mara looked up at him, trying to read what lay behind his words. Protection, yes, but also fear, she realized. Fear of pushing too hard, of taking advantage, of becoming the kind of man who'd demand something she didn't want to give. What if I want it to change us? She asked quietly. Elias went very still. Mara, not tonight, she added quickly. I'm not saying, I just mean maybe it doesn't have to stay exactly the same. Maybe we can grow into it. His expression softened. Maybe we can. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made Mara's breath catch. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. You should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. Mara nodded, knowing he was right, but wishing they could stay in this moment a little longer. She settled into the bed with Lily, and Elias bedded down by the fire as he always did. But as Mara lay in this darkness, listening to the crackle of flames and Elias's steady breathing, she couldn't help thinking that everything had changed after all. She was Mrs. Rook now, and tomorrow they'd find out if that was enough. The summons came 6 days later, delivered by a grim-faced rider who wouldn't meet their eyes. Elias took the official document, read it twice, then handed it to Mara. Her hands trembled as she scanned the legal language. Hearing, Judge Mitchell, Ashford Crossing Courthouse. 3 days hence. Matter of custody regarding minor child Lily Rose Rook. They're still coming after her, Mara said, her voice hollow. They are. Elias took the paper back, jaw set. But they're going to find it a lot harder now. The marriage might not be enough. Then we make it enough. We show them a real family, a real home. We don't give them any ammunition. The day of the hearing dawned cold and clear. They dressed carefully. Elias in his Sunday clothes, such as they were, Mara, in the best dress she owned, pieced together from fabric she'd scavenged and mended with painstaking care. Lily wore the christening gown Elias's wife, Emily, had made, white linen with delicate embroidery. The ride into town was silent, all three of them tense. Mara held Lily close, whispering reassurances that were as much for herself as for the baby. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. It seemed half the town had turned out, drawn by scandal and judgment. Mara felt their eyes like brands as she and Elias made their way up the steps, Lily in her arms. Inside, the courtroom was austere. Wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, windows that let in weak winter light. Mayor Thornton sat in the front row with Harold Finch and Sheriff Davies. The Weatherbys occupied the opposite side, a prosperous-looking couple in their 40s, the woman already watching Lily with hungry eyes. Doc Morrison was there too, along with Samuel Chen, and to Mara's surprise, Mr. Brennan from the general store. 3 friendly faces in a sea of hostility. Judge Mitchell entered and everyone rose. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the expression of someone who'd already made up his mind. Be seated, he said, settling behind his desk. We're here to determine the matter of custody for the minor child Lily Rose Rook. Mr. Finch, present your case. Finch stood, smoothing his papers. Your Honor, the Territorial Child Welfare Board has concerns about the environment in which this child is being raised. Mr. Rook is a widower living in isolation with a woman of questionable background. Objection, Elias said, standing. That woman is my wife. Legally married, documented, and filed. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Finch's expression tightened. The marriage was performed after our initial investigation, he said. It's clearly a response to our inquiry, not a genuine... Are you questioning the validity of a legal marriage performed by a licensed physician and witnessed by a respected member of the community? Elias's voice was hard. Judge Mitchell held up a hand. The marriage is legal, Mr. Finch. You'll need a different argument. Finch regrouped quickly. Very well, the concern remains about Mrs. Rook's fitness as a mother. She has no experience, no training, no references. She was living as a vagrant before Mr. Rook took her in. There's no evidence she's capable of providing the stable, nurturing environment a child needs. That's not true, Mara said, standing before she could think better of it. Mitchell looked at her over his glasses. Mrs. Rook, you'll have a chance to speak. Sit down. But Mara didn't sit. She couldn't. Not while they talked about her like she wasn't there, like she hadn't spent every day of the last 2 months loving and caring for Lily. I was a vagrant, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I had nothing. I was nothing. But when Lily was dying and every respectable person in this town turned their backs, I said yes. I tried. And she lived. Mrs. Rook, Mitchell began, I don't have training. I don't have references, but I have her. Mara looked down at Lily, who gazed back with perfect trust. And she has me. I feed her when she's hungry. I hold her when she cries. I stay up all night when she's sick. I love her more than my own life. So you tell me, what reference is better than that? The courtroom was dead silent. Mara's heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe, but she held her ground, meeting Judge Mitchell's gaze directly. Mrs. Weatherby stood, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Your Honor, no one doubts this young woman's affection. But affection isn't enough. A child needs stability, proper education, social standing. We can provide all of that and more. You can provide money, Elias said flatly. That's not the same thing. It's a start, Mr. Weatherby interjected. Along with a proper home, servants, tutors, strangers, Mara interrupted. You're talking about strangers raising her, people she doesn't know. She's an infant, Mrs. Weatherby said. She doesn't know anyone yet. Better to place her now, before attachments form. Attachments have already formed, Doc Morrison said, standing. Your Honor, if I may... Mitchell nodded, looking curious. I delivered that child, Morrison said. I've checked on her 3 times since. Each time I've observed the care she's receiving. Mrs. Rook, Mara, has kept her healthy, well-fed, and thriving. Lily's gained weight, her color is good, her development normal. Medically speaking, that child is receiving excellent care. The medical aspects are not in question, Finch said impatiently. It's the moral and social environment. What's immoral about a married couple raising their child? Chen spoke up from his seat. They're legal. They're devoted. The baby is healthy and happy. What more do you want? We want what's best for the child. Mrs. Weatherby's composure cracked. She deserves better than poverty and isolation and a mother who... Choose your next words very carefully, Elias said, his voice lethal quiet. Judge Mitchell banged his gavel. Order, everyone sit down except Mr. and Mrs. Rook. Slowly, reluctantly, people took their seats. Mara remained standing, Lily in her arms, Elias beside her like a wall of support. Mitchell removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. When he spoke, his voice was measured. I've heard arguments on both sides. The Weatherbys make valid points about resources and stability. Mr. and Mrs. Rook make equally valid points about attachment and care. He paused. However, there is one factor I need to observe for myself before making a decision. What factor? Elias asked. The child's response. Mitchell stood. May I? He approached them, and Mara's arms tightened instinctively around Lily. The judge noticed but said nothing, simply holding out his hands. Let me hold her, just for a moment. Mara looked at Elias. He gave a tiny nod. Slowly, reluctantly, she transferred Lily to Mitchell's arms. The baby stared up at him, her little face scrunched in confusion. Then, as the unfamiliar face continued to loom over her, Lily's mouth opened, and she screamed, not the angry cry of hunger or discomfort, the pure, terrified wail of a child torn from safety. She thrashed in Mitchell's arms, reaching back toward Mara with desperate hands. Ma, Lily sobbed, the word clear and unmistakable. Ma. The courtroom erupted. Mara lunged forward, taking Lily back, and the baby immediately buried her face in Mara's neck, her screams subsiding to hiccuping sobs. She can talk, someone gasped. First word, Morrison said with satisfaction. And she chose well. Mitchell stared at Mara and the clinging baby, something shifting in his expression. He looked at the Weatherbys, at Finch, at the assembled crowd. Then he returned to his seat. I've made my decision, he said. The room went silent. The child stays with Mr. and Mrs. Rook. Your Honor, Finch protested. You can't base a custody decision on, I can and I have. Mitchell's voice was firm. That child knows her mother. She feels safe with her mother. And unless you can show me evidence of abuse or neglect, which you haven't, I'm not going to tear a baby away from the only parent she recognizes. This is outrageous, Weatherby hissed. What's outrageous, Mitchell said, is this entire proceeding. These people are legally married. They're caring for their child. The fact that their circumstances don't meet your standards of propriety is not grounds for removing a baby from a loving home. He banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Custody remains with the biological father and his lawful wife. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elias's hand found Mara's, squeezing tight. They'd won. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Some cheering, more grumbling with displeasure. Mayor Thornton and the Weatherbys stormed out. Finch gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements, but Mara barely noticed. She held Lily close, pressing kisses to the baby's tear-stained face, while Elias wrapped his arms around them both. You did it, he murmured against her hair. You won. We won, Mara corrected. Doc Morrison approached, grinning. That was something. Never seen a baby testify before. She knew what to say, Mara said, stroking Lily's soft hair. The baby had calmed now, making small, contented sounds, her fist curled in Mara's dress. Children always do, Morrison said. Congratulations, both of you. They left the courthouse to a mixture of stares, some approving, many still hostile. But Mara walked with her head high, Lily in her arms and Elias at her side. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a mother, a wife, someone who mattered. And no one could take that away from her now. The ride back to the cabin should have felt like a victory procession, but the weight of what had just happened settled over them like fresh snow, quiet, heavy, transformative. Lily had fallen asleep against Mara's chest, exhausted from her courthouse outburst, her tiny fist still clutching the fabric of Mara's dress. Elias rode in silence, his jaw working, eyes fixed on the horizon. They were halfway home when he finally spoke. They're not going to let this go. Mara had been thinking the same thing. I know. Thornton's pride took a beating today. The Weatherbys, too. People like that don't forget. So what do we do? Elias glanced back at her, his expression grim. We make sure they can't touch us again. We build something so solid they can't tear it down. How? I don't know yet. He turned his attention back to the trail. But we'll figure it out. We always do. The confidence in his voice steadied something in Mara's chest. They'd survived everything thrown at them so far. Somehow, they'd survive this too. When they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of amber and rose. Elias helped Mara down from the horse, careful not to wake Lily, then went to tend the mare while Mara carried the baby inside. The cabin felt different somehow, smaller and safer all at once. Mara laid Lily in her cradle, tucking blankets around her with practiced hands, then stood watching the baby sleep. In the courthouse, when Mitchell had taken Lily from her arms, Mara had felt something fundamental shift inside her. It wasn't just attachment anymore, wasn't just duty or gratitude. It was fierce, primal, unbreakable love. This was her daughter, not by birth, but by every moment of care, every sleepless night, every fear faced and overcome. The law had confirmed it today, but Mara's heart had known it long before. The door opened, admitting a gust of cold air and Elias. He stomped snow from his boots, hung up his coat, then paused when he saw Mara standing by the cradle. You all right? He asked quietly. I don't know. Mara looked at him. When she called me Ma in that courtroom, I know. Do you? Because I felt like my heart was going to explode, like everything I've ever wanted just crystallized in that one word. Her voice broke. I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. Elias crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Neither did I. After Emily died, I thought... He stopped, swallowed hard. I thought we were done. That it was just going to be me and Lily barely surviving until she was old enough to leave. I didn't expect... What? You, he said simply. I didn't expect you. The air between them felt charged, electric. Mara's pulse quickened. Elias! A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They both tensed, hands instinctively moving toward each other before falling away. Elias grabbed his rifle from above the door and moved to the window. It's Morrison, he said, relief evident in his voice. The doctor entered with a gust of wind and snow, carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Thought you might want to see this before it makes the rounds tomorrow. He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a newspaper, the Ashford Crossing Gazette. The headline made Mara's breath catch. Judge rules in favor of Rook family. Child remains with parents. Peterson at the paper is no friend of Thornton's, Morrison explained. He's been waiting for a chance to embarrass him. This was it. Elias took the paper, scanning the article. He quotes you. He quotes everyone, including Lily. Morrison's eyes twinkled. That baby's first word is now a matter of public record. Mama, clear as a bell, witnessed by half the town. Mara sank onto a chair, overwhelmed. They're going to hate us even more for this. Some will, Morrison agreed, but some won't. You'd be surprised how many people are tired of Thornton and his cronies running everything. You gave them something to root for today. We just wanted to keep our family together, Elias said. And you did. But whether you meant to or not, you also challenged the whole social order they've built. Morrison retrieved the paper, rewrapping it. That makes you dangerous. And dangerous people need to be careful. After he left, Mara and Elias sat by the fire, the weight of Morrison's warning settling between them. Dangerous. The word felt absurd applied to them. A widower and a former vagrant just trying to raise a baby. But Mara understood what he meant. They'd defied expectations, broken unspoken rules, and won. That kind of victory made enemies. We should eat something, Elias said finally, standing. Neither of us touch food all day. They prepared a simple meal together, moving around each other with the easy familiarity they'd developed over months of shared space. Bread, cheese, the last of the venison Elias had smoked. They ate in silence, too exhausted for conversation, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from understanding. Lily woke as they were cleaning up, her cries splitting the quiet. Mara went to her immediately, lifting her from the cradle. Hey, sweet girl, you hungry? She prepared Lily's milk while Elias stoked the fire. The baby ate eagerly, her small hands grasping at Mara's fingers, and when she finished, she didn't want to be put down. She clung to Mara, making small distressed sounds whenever Mara tried to set her in the cradle. She's scared, Mara said softly. She remembers. Remembers what? Being taken from me, in the courthouse. Elias came to stand beside them, reaching out to stroke Lily's hair. The baby turned her head toward him, her cries subsiding to hiccups. Da, she said suddenly, reaching for him. Elias froze, his hand suspended in midair. Did she just… Da-da-da, Lily repeated, more insistent now. Slowly, Elias took her from Mara's arms. Lily settled against his chest with a contented sigh, her eyes already drooping. 2 words in one day, Mara said, her throat tight. She's brilliant. She's ours, Elias said, and the word hung in the air between them. Not his, not hers. Ours. They put Lily down together, both of them hovering over the cradle until they were sure she was truly asleep. Then they stood awkwardly in the center of the cabin, the day's adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. You should sleep, Elias said. Real sleep. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. I'm fine. Elias. Mara put a hand on his arm. They're not coming tonight. We won. For now, we won. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. All right, he said quietly. We both sleep. He moved toward his bedroll by the fire, but Mara's voice stopped him. Wait. He turned back. We're married now, she said, the words coming out in a rush. Legally, officially. And I know we said it was just on paper, but… She took a breath. The bed is big enough for 2, if we're careful, if we stay on our own sides. Elias stared at her. Mara, I'm not saying… I don't mean… She stumbled over the words. I just mean it's cold. The fire doesn't reach that far. And you've been sleeping on the floor for months. It's not right. It's fine. It's not fine. You're my husband. You shouldn't have to sleep on the floor in your own house. The words my husband felt strange and right all at once. Elias's expression softened. You sure about this? I'm sure I trust you, Mara said. That's enough, isn't it? After a long moment, Elias nodded. All right. But you tell me if you change your mind. Any time. They prepared for bed with careful formality, Mara changing behind a screen while Elias banked the fire. When she emerged in her nightgown, he was already lying on the far edge of the bed, his back to the center, giving her as much space as possible. Mara climbed in on the other side, her heart hammering. The bed that had felt spacious when she slept alone now felt impossibly small. She could feel the heat of him, hear his breathing, sense every small movement. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night." Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion claimed her anyway. She drifted off to the sound of Lily's soft breathing and the warmth of another person nearby, and for the first time in her entire life, Mara Vance felt completely safe. She woke in the gray light of pre-dawn to find herself curled against Elias's back, her arm draped over his waist. Panic flooded through her. She must have moved in her sleep, crossing the invisible boundary they'd established. She started to pull away, but Elias's hand caught hers, holding it in place. "Don't," he said quietly. "It's all right." "I didn't mean to." "I know." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But I don't mind, if you don't." Mara's breath caught. She could pull away, retreat to her side of the bed, maintain the fiction that this was purely practical. Or she could stay, accept this small intimacy, let something new grow between them. She stayed. They lay like that as the light strengthened, not speaking, barely breathing, just existing in this fragile moment of connection. Finally, Lily's waking cries broke the spell. "I'll get her," Mara said, reluctantly pulling away. The day that followed felt different from all the others. The rhythms were the same, feeding Lily, preparing meals, tending to chores, but there was a new awareness between Mara and Elias. Their hands brushed when passing dishes. Their eyes met and held longer than necessary. The space between them felt charged with possibility. In the afternoon, while Lily napped, Elias brought in firewood, and Mara noticed him favoring his left side. "You're hurt," she said. "Just sore, old injury acting up." "Let me see." He hesitated, then pulled off his shirt. A long scar ran down his ribs, puckered and old, but the muscles around it were visibly strained. "What happened?" Mara asked, reaching out to touch the scar before she could stop herself. "Horse threw me 3 years back, broke 2 ribs, tore up the muscle. It heals, then flares up again when the weather turns." Mara's fingers traced the scar gently. She felt Elias's sharp intake of breath, saw goosebumps rise on his skin. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling her hand back. "Don't be." His voice was rough. It felt good. Your hands are warm." "I could rub it," Mara offered, then flushed. "The muscle, I mean, help it relax." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "All right." He sat at the table while Mara stood behind him, her hands tentatively finding the knotted muscles. She worked carefully, feeling him tense, and then gradually relax under her touch. "Better?" she asked after a few minutes. "Much." He caught her hand, pulling her around to face him. "Thank you." They were close now, closer than they'd been since the wedding. Mara could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his lips parted slightly when he looked at her. "Mara," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "This marriage, it started as protection, a legal maneuver. But it's becoming—" He stopped, searching for words. "It's becoming real for me. You're becoming real for me. And I need to know if—" A horse's whinny cut through the air. Then voices. Multiple voices. They both froze, the moment shattering. Elias grabbed his shirt, pulling it on as he moved to the window. "Riders," he said, his voice flat. 6 of them. Mara's stomach dropped. "Thornton?" "And others. They're armed." Fear spiked through her. "What do we do?" Elias grabbed his rifle, checking the load. "You stay inside with Lily. No matter what happens, you don't come out." "Elias, promise me." She wanted to argue, to tell him she'd stand beside him, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. "I promise." He kissed her forehead, quick, fierce, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Mara ran to the window, Lily clutched against her chest. The riders had stopped in the yard, Thornton at their head. Sheriff Davies was there, along with 4 other men Mara recognized from town. All carried weapons. "Rook," Thornton called out. "We need to talk." "Then talk," Elias said, rifle held loosely but ready. You made fools of us in that courthouse. You made fools of yourselves. Thornton's face darkened. You think this is over? You think one judge's ruling changes anything? Changes everything, actually. The law says she's ours. The law can be changed. Judges can be replaced. Thornton leaned forward in his saddle. You're not welcome in Ashford Crossing anymore. You understand that? You show your face in town, there'll be trouble. That a threat? It's a promise. We don't want your kind here. The woman, the bastard. Careful, Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. Or what? You'll shoot us? All 6 of us? Thornton smiled cruelly. You'd hang for that. Maybe, but you'd be dead first. The standoff stretched taut. Mara could barely breathe, watching Elias face down 6 armed men alone. She looked around desperately for something, anything she could do to help. Then Sheriff Davies spoke up, his voice uncertain. Mayor, maybe we should… Shut up! Thornton's eyes never left Elias. Here's what's going to happen, Rook. You're going to disappear. Take your little family and leave the territory. Because if you stay, we'll make your life a living hell. No one will trade with you. No one will help you. You'll starve out here, and when you come crawling back to town, we'll take that child and give her to a proper family. No, Elias said simply. No? This is my land, my home. You don't get to run me off it. We'll see about that. Thornton wheeled his horse around. You've been warned, Rook. What happens next is on you. The riders left, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. Elias stood motionless until they were out of sight, then his shoulders sagged. He walked back to his cabin, his steps heavy. Mara met him at the door. What are we going to do? I don't know. He set the rifle down with shaking hands. I honestly don't know. That night they lay in bed side by side, not touching, both staring at the ceiling. The easy intimacy of the morning felt like a lifetime ago. We could leave, Mara said quietly. Start over somewhere else. Run away? Survive. Elias was silent for a long time. This land, it's all I have. Emily's buried here. It's Lily's inheritance. If I let them drive me off, what does that teach her? That bullies win. It teaches her that her parents chose her over pride. He turned his head to look at her. Is that what you want, to leave? Mara thought about it honestly. The cabin had become home. The valley, the mountains, even the harsh weather. It was all part of who she'd become. But more than that, she thought about Lily growing up in a place where her parents were hated, where every trip to town meant facing hostility and judgment. I want her to be safe, she said finally. I want her to be happy. I want her to know she's loved and wanted and belongs. If we can't give her that here, we can, Elias interrupted. We will, somehow. But his voice lacked conviction, and Mara knew he was as lost as she was. The answer came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Doc Morrison arrived at dawn with news that made them both sit up straight. There's a family, he said, accepting the coffee Mara pressed into his hands. The Johnsons. Homesteaders about 20 miles north. They're getting on in years, looking to sell their spread and move back east to be near their daughter. What's that got to do with us? Elias asked. Their land borders yours. If you bought it, you'd double your acreage. More importantly, you'd have direct access to the Northern Trail, the one that leads to Silver Creek instead of Ashford Crossing. Understanding dawned on Elias's face. We wouldn't need Ashford Crossing. Exactly. Silver Creek's smaller, but growing. No Thornton, no old grudges. You could trade there, get supplies there, build a life there. Morrison set down his cup. It's not cheap. Johnson wants $500 for the land and buildings. Elias's face fell. I don't have that kind of money. How much do you have? Maybe 200, saved over years. I've got 75 I can lend you, Morrison said. And I talked to Sam Chen. He'll put in another 75, says you're good for it. That's still not enough. No, Morrison agreed. But it's a start. You'd need to come up with the rest somehow. After Morrison left, Mara and Elias sat in heavy silence. $500 might as well have been $5,000. They had no way to earn that kind of money, not isolated as they were, not with a baby to care for. There is one thing, Mara said slowly. What? She stood, went to the corner where she kept her few possessions, and pulled out the small cloth bag she'd carried from Ashford Crossing. She opened it, upending the contents onto the table. A silver locket, tarnished but intact, tumbled out along with a handful of coins. "My mother's," she explained. "The only thing I have from her. It's real silver, maybe worth something." Elias stared at it. "Mara, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." She picked up the locket, running her thumb over the engraved surface. "She died giving me life. I'd like to think she'd approve of me using this to build one. It might not be worth much. Then we'll find other ways. We'll work, we'll save, we'll do whatever it takes." She looked at him fiercely. "We're not giving up, Elias. We're not letting them win." He stood, crossing to her, and took her face in his hands. "How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky? I'm the vagrant you picked up behind a burned building. You're the woman who saved my daughter, who saved me." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You're everything, Mara. Everything." Then he kissed her. It wasn't like the perfunctory kiss at their wedding. This was real, deep, full of all the things they'd been dancing around for weeks. Mara's hands came up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. And when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "That wasn't part of the arrangement," Mara whispered. "No, it wasn't." Elias's thumb traced her cheekbone. "Is that all right?" "More than all right." They stood there, foreheads pressed together, until Lily's cry reminded them of reality. But something had shifted between them, something fundamental and irreversible. They were no longer just partners in survival. They were becoming something more. Over the next week, they threw themselves into planning. Elias rode to the Johnson place and negotiated hard, getting the price down to $450. Morrison arranged a loan from the Territorial Bank for $100, using his own property as collateral. Chen contributed another $50. Mara's locket, when taken to Silver Creek and appraised, brought in $40. That left them $60 short. Elias sold his father's pocket watch, the last thing he owned from his family. Mara sold her labor, making a deal with the general store in Silver Creek to sew shirts for $30. For 2 weeks, she sewed every night after Lily went to sleep, her fingers bleeding, her eyes burning, until she had the required dozen shirts. On a cold morning in early spring, they rode to the Johnson place with a leather pouch containing $450. "Mister." Johnson counted it twice, then extended his weathered hand. "She's yours," he said. "All of it. May it serve you better than it served us." They signed the papers in Silver Creek with a lawyer as witness. When it was done, Elias and Mara stood outside the office, holding the deed between them. "We own it," Mara said, still not quite believing it. "We do." Elias looked at her. "Together." "Together," she echoed. That night, back at their cabin, their expanded property now stretching far to the north, they celebrated with a simple meal and a rare bottle of whiskey Morrison had gifted them. Lily played on a blanket by the fire, babbling nonsense words and laughing at her own sounds. "I want to add your name," Elias said suddenly. Mara looked up from where she was washing dishes. "What?" "To the deed. The land. Everything." He pulled the document from his pocket. "I want it in both our names. Legal and binding, equal ownership." "Elias, men don't do that." "I don't care what men do. This is ours. You worked for it, same as me. It should be in your name, too." Mara's throat tightened. In a world where women owned nothing, where everything belonged to fathers or husbands, this was radical, revolutionary. "Are you sure?" "Never been more sure of anything." He found a pen, dipped it in ink, and carefully added her name below his. "There. Now it's real." Mara stared at the document, at her name written in Elias's careful hand. Mara Rook, joint owner. Not property, not dependent, equal. She crossed to him, took his face in her hands, and kissed him with everything she had. When they broke apart, his eyes were dark with desire. "Lily's asleep," Mara said softly. "She is. And we're married." "We are. So maybe—" She took a breath. "Maybe tonight doesn't have to be like other nights." Elias searched her face. "You mean that?" "I do." He stood, taking her hand, and led her to the bed. And for the first time since their paper marriage, it became real in every sense of the word. Outside, the wind howled and the stars wheeled overhead. Inside, 3 people who'd been broken and desperate and alone found something none of them had dared hope for. They found each other, and they found home. Morning came soft and golden, light filtering through frost-etched windows to paint the cabin in shades of amber. Mara woke to the warmth of Elias's arm around her waist, his steady breathing against her neck, and for a moment she simply existed in the perfect stillness of it. Everything had changed in the night, not just physically, though that had been a revelation all its own, but something deeper. The walls they'd carefully maintained between them had finally crumbled, leaving them exposed and vulnerable and utterly bound to each other. Lily's babbling from her cradle broke the spell. Mara started to rise, but Elias's arm tightened. "Let me," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder before slipping from the bed. Mara watched him lift their daughter, marveling at the tenderness in his large hands as he changed her and brought her to the bed. Lily squirmed with delight, her small hands reaching for Mara. "Ma, ma, ma," she chanted, and Mara's heart squeezed. "Good morning, sweet girl." She took Lily, settling her against her chest while Elias built up the fire. The domesticity of the moment struck her. This was her life now, her family, her home. "I need to ride to the Johnson place today," Elias said, pulling on his shirt. "Check the buildings, see what repairs are needed before we can use them. I'll come with you, Lily and I both." He turned, surprised. "It's a long ride in the cold. We're a family now. We do things together." Mara met his eyes. "Besides, I want to see what we bought." So they bundled Lily in layers of wool and fur, packed supplies, and set out across their expanded land. The morning was crisp and clear, the snow crunching under the horses' hooves, their breath misting in the air. Mara rode behind Elias with Lily secure between them, and despite the cold, she'd never felt warmer. The Johnson place appeared as they crested a rise. A small cabin, a barn that had seen better days, a chicken coop with half its roof caved in, and fields that stretched toward distant mountains. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "Needs work," Elias said, helping Mara down. "Everything worth having does." They explored the property together, Elias pointing out what needed immediate attention and what could wait. The cabin was smaller than theirs, but structurally sound. The barn needed new shingles and reinforcement on the south wall. The fields would require clearing before spring planting. "We could run cattle here," Elias said, standing in the barn doorway and looking out over the land. "Build up a herd, sell beef in Silver Creek. Maybe even horses eventually. That takes money we don't have. We'll save, work hard, build it slow." He turned to her. "We've got time." Time. The word felt luxurious, almost decadent. For the first time in her life, Mara had a future that stretched beyond the next meal, the next night, the next crisis. They were heading back to the cabin when Lily pointed at something and squealed, "Horsey!" Mara followed her gaze and felt her stomach drop. 3 riders were approaching from the south, moving fast. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead horse. "Elias," she said quietly. He'd already seen them. His hand moved to the rifle slung across his saddle, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Sheriff Davies reached them first, reining in his horse hard enough to make it dance. Behind him rode 2 deputies Mara didn't recognize. "Rook," Davies said, his face grim. "Need a word." "So talk." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Mara and Lily, then back to Elias. "Might be better if the lady took the child inside. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my wife." Davies shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "There's been an incident in town 2 nights ago." "What kind of incident?" "Fire. The Weatherby house burned to the ground." Mara's hand tightened on Lily. "Is anyone—" "They got out, both of them, but they lost everything." Davies's jaw worked. "And they're saying you did it." The accusation hung in the frozen air like a blade. Elias went very still. "That's absurd," Mara said. "We haven't been anywhere near Ashford Crossing in weeks." "Can you prove that?" "We don't have to prove anything," Elias said, his voice dangerous. "The burden of proof is on the accuser." "Normally, yes, but the Weatherbys are well connected, and they're convinced you did this as revenge for the custody hearing. Mrs. Weatherby says she saw someone matching your description near their property that night." "She's lying." "Maybe, but I've got orders to bring you in for questioning." Davy's hand moved to rest on his pistol. I'd prefer this went easy. You've got no warrant, no evidence, just the word of people who've been trying to destroy us since day one. I've got enough to bring you in. You can come willing, or I can make it official. The deputies behind him shifted, hands moving toward their own weapons. Mara's heart hammered. This was it, the final move Thornton and the Weatherbys had been planning. Frame Elias for arson, get him arrested, and while he was locked up, they'd come for Lily again. How long? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Davies looked at her. What? How long would he be held? Until the judge can hear the case. Week? Maybe 2. No, Elias said flatly. I'm not leaving them alone and unprotected for 2 weeks. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Mara could see Elias calculating odds, weighing options, considering whether he could outdraw 3 armed men while protecting her and Lily. Elias, she said quietly. Don't. Mara, think about her. She shifted Lily in her arms. Think about what happens if you fight and lose. His eyes met hers, tortured. She could see him warring with himself, the instinct to protect versus the reality of the situation. I'll go, he said finally, the words clearly costing him. But first I take my family home, make sure they're safe. Davies considered, then nodded. We'll escort you. The ride back to the cabin was the longest of Mara's life. Elias rode stiff and silent, and Lily sensed the tension, whimpering and clutching at Mara's coat. When they finally reached home, Elias helped them down, his hands lingering on Mara's arms. Listen to me, he said urgently. You take Lily and you go to Morrison's. You stay there until I get back. What if you don't get back? I will. Elias, I will, he repeated fiercely. But if something goes wrong, if they try to keep me longer, you take her and you run. You go to Silver Creek, find the lawyer we used, Henderson. He'll help you. I'm not leaving without you. You will if you have to. Promise me, Mara. Promise me you'll protect her no matter what. Tears burned her eyes. I promise. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, one hand tangled in her hair, the other cradling Lily between them. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. I love you, he said. I should have said it before. I love you, Mara Rook. I love you too, she whispered. Davies cleared his throat. Time to go, Rook. Elias released her slowly, like letting go was physically painful. He mounted his horse, and Mara watched him ride away with the sheriff and deputies, her heart shattering with every hoofbeat. Lily started to cry, reaching after him. Da-da-da-da-da! I know, baby, Mara said, her own tears falling freely now. I know. She stood in the yard until they disappeared from sight, then turned toward the cabin with leaden steps. Inside, the space felt impossibly empty without Elias's presence. Mara fed Lily mechanically, her mind racing through scenarios, each worse than the last. She was packing supplies to take to Morrison's when she heard horses again. Fear spiked through her. It was too soon for Davies to be back, which meant she grabbed the rifle from above the door and moved to the window. 4 riders this time, and her worst fears materialized. Mayor Thornton, Harold Finch, and 2 men she didn't recognize. They weren't here for Elias. They were here for Lily. Mara's hands shook as she checked the rifle's load. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she'd watched Elias enough to understand the basics. Point, steady your breathing, squeeze the trigger. Could she actually shoot someone? For Lily? Yes. The riders stopped in the yard. Thornton dismounted, his face smug with triumph. Mrs. Rook, he called out, we know you're in there. Come out peacefully, and this doesn't have to get ugly. Mara moved to the door but didn't open it. Get off my property. Your property? Thornton laughed. That's rich. Your husband's a criminal, on his way to jail. That makes you unfit to care for the child. We have paperwork from Judge Mitchell authorizing us to take her into protective custody. That's a lie. Mitchell ruled in our favor. Circumstances change. New evidence has come to light about your husband's violent tendencies. The judge agrees the child isn't safe here. Finch stepped forward, holding up official-looking papers. This is legal, Mrs. Rook. You can't fight the law. Watch me. She raised the rifle, pointing it through a gap in the door. The men stepped back, hands moving to their weapons. Put the gun down, Thornton ordered. You're only making this worse. You're not taking her. You can't hold us off forever. Eventually you'll have to sleep, have to eat. We can wait. And they could. Mara's mind raced. She was alone, outgunned, with no way to call for help. Morrison's place was 2 hours' ride away, Silver Creek even farther. By the time help arrived, if it arrived at all, they'd have broken in and taken Lily. Unless she made them believe she was truly dangerous. I've got nothing left to lose, she called out, steadying her voice. You take her, my life is over anyway, so I'll take at least one of you with me. Who wants to be first? She moved the rifle barrel, pointing it directly at Thornton. The mayor's face paled. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice wavered. Am I? You took everything from me once before, made me invisible, made me nothing. I survived that. But lose her? Mara's voice cracked. I won't survive that, which means I've got no reason not to pull this trigger. The standoff stretched taut. Behind them, one of the unknown men shifted nervously. Mayor, maybe we should... Shut up, Thornton hissed. Then, like a miracle, more horses appeared over the ridge. Not one or two, but a dozen. Mara's breath caught as she recognized the lead rider, Doc Morrison. And he'd brought help. Behind him rode Samuel Chen, Mr. Brennan from the general store, and others Mara recognized from Silver Creek. People she'd traded with, smiled at, who'd seen her with Lily at the general store and in the street, witnesses to her motherhood. Well now, Morrison said, reining in his horse. This looks interesting. This is none of your concern, Morrison, Thornton said. I disagree. Mrs. Rook here is my patient. So is the baby. And I'm not about to let you terrorize them. We have legal authority. Let me see those papers. Morrison dismounted, snatching the documents from Finch's hands. He scanned them quickly, then laughed. These aren't worth the paper they're printed on. This isn't Mitchell's signature. I'd know it anywhere. This is a forgery. Finch's face went red. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you come out here with fake documents trying to steal a child from her mother? Morrison handed the papers to Chen. Sam, you recognize this signature? Chen studied it, then shook his head. Not Mitchell's. I've seen enough of his signatures on town contracts to know. That's ridiculous, Thornton blustered. You're both mistaken. We're not, came a new voice. Everyone turned. Another rider was approaching, this one wearing a badge that caught the sunlight. Marshal Wade from the territorial capital. He rode straight up to Thornton, his face granite. Mayor Thornton. Mr. Finch. You're both under arrest. What? Thornton sputtered. On what charges? Forgery, attempted kidnapping, conspiracy to commit arson. Wade pulled out his own set of papers. I've got sworn testimony from a man named Carl Briggs who says you paid him to set the Weatherby fire and implicate Elias Rook. The color drained from Thornton's face. I never... Briggs is in custody right now, singing like a bird to save his own neck. Says you've been planning this for weeks. Frame Rook, get him arrested, then come take the child while he's locked up. Wade looked at Finch. And you helped him forge those custody documents. I was trying to help the child, Finch protested weakly. You were trying to line your pockets. Briggs says the Weatherbys paid you $1,000 to make their adoption happen. Wade gestured to his deputies. Take them both. The deputies moved in, binding Thornton and Finch's hands. The mayor tried to resist, but it was futile. This isn't over, he spat at Mara. You're still nothing. You'll always be nothing. Mara stepped out onto the porch, Lily in one arm, rifle in the other. She looked at the man who'd made her invisible, who'd tried to destroy her family, and felt nothing but pity. I'm a mother, she said quietly. I'm a wife. I'm a landowner. I belong somewhere, and to someone. That's more than you'll ever have now. Wade mounted up, his prisoner secured. Mrs. Rook, your husband should be released within the hour. The charges have been dropped. He tipped his hat. My apologies for the trouble. As the marshal and his prisoners rode off, Morrison approached the porch. How did you know? Mara asked. I didn't, not for certain. But when I heard Elias had been arrested, I knew something was wrong. The timing was too convenient. He smiled. So I sent a wire to a friend in the capital. Turns out Briggs has a loose tongue when he's drunk. Started bragging about the easy money he made. Someone heard and reported it. Thank you, Mara said, her voice breaking. You saved us. You saved yourself. I just brought witnesses. Morrison looked at the assembled riders. These folks wanted to come, wanted to make sure you and the little one were safe. Chen stepped forward. You're one of us now, Mara. Silver Creek looks after its own. One by one, the others nodded agreement. These people who barely knew her, who had no reason to care, had ridden out to protect her. Because she'd become part of their community, earned their respect through nothing more than being a good mother and a decent person. She wasn't invisible anymore. Mara waited on the porch, Lily playing at her feet, watching the southern trail. The sun was setting when she finally saw him, a single rider moving fast across the snow. Elias. She ran to meet him, Lily bouncing in her arms, and he was off his horse before it fully stopped, sweeping them both into his embrace. You're all right, he said against her hair. Tell me you're all right. We're fine. We're safe. It's over, Elias. It's really over. He pulled back to look at her face, and she saw the tracks of tears on his cheeks. Morrison told me what happened, what you did. You held them off with a rifle you've never fired. I would have fired it. For her, I would have done anything. I know. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I know you would. Lily squirmed between them, demanding attention. Da-da-da! Elias took her, holding her close, and the three of them stood there in the dying light, just holding each other and breathing. That night, after Lily was asleep, they sat by the fire and talked about everything that had happened. The conspiracy, the arrests, the community that had rallied around them. Thornton and Finch will go to prison, Elias said. Wade was clear about that. The evidence is overwhelming. And the Weatherbys? Broke and disgraced. Turns out half the town knew they were paying Finch under the table. They'll be lucky if they don't face charges themselves. Mara leaned against his shoulder. I can't believe it's really over. Not over, just beginning. Elias stood, pulling her to her feet. Come with me. He led her outside into the cold night. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. He pointed north toward their expanded property. Next spring we'll build a new house there, bigger, room for Lily to grow, and maybe brothers or sisters for her someday. He turned to Mara. We'll plant crops, raise cattle, build something that lasts, something we can pass on to her. That's a lot of work. Good thing we're not afraid of work. He pulled her close. What do you think? Can you see it? Mara looked out at the land, their land, and for the first time in her life she could see a future. Not just tomorrow or next week, but years stretching out. Lily growing up strong and loved. More children, maybe. Seasons of planting and harvest. Christmases and birthdays and ordinary beautiful days. A life. I can see it, she whispered. I can see all of it. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the valley green. Elias and Mara worked from dawn to dusk, preparing the Johnson property for planting. Morrison helped them buy 3 heifers and a bull on credit, the foundation of their future herd. Chen arranged for lumber deliveries from Silver Creek. Slowly, steadily, they began building. Lily grew like a weed, adding new words daily, toddling after Elias as he worked, helping Mara in the garden. She was bright and fearless, with Elias's dark hair and eyes that held both their stubbornness. One afternoon in late May, Mara was hanging laundry while Lily played in the grass when she felt a familiar flutter low in her belly. She pressed a hand to her stomach, breath-catching. It was too soon to be certain, but she knew. The same way she'd known that first night that saving Lily would change everything. She was pregnant. She told Elias that night after Lily was asleep. He stared at her for a long moment, then lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing. Another one, he said, setting her down gently. We're having another baby. Are you happy? Happy? He cupped her face. Mara, you've given me everything. A family, a home, a reason to keep fighting. I've never been happier. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Neither have I. The house they built on the Johnson land rose slowly through the summer. By autumn, the frame was complete. By winter, they had walls and a roof and windows that let in light. It wasn't fancy, rough pine floors, simple furniture mostly built by Elias's own hands, but it was theirs. On a cold December morning, Doc Morrison delivered their son. Thomas, they named him, after Elias's father. He came into the world screaming, healthy and strong, while Lily stood by the bed demanding to see her baby brother. Morrison placed the infant in Mara's arms and stepped back, watching the family with satisfaction. "You did good, Mara Rook," he said. "You did real good." 3 years later, Mara stood on the porch of their house watching the sunset over their land. The herd had grown to 20 head. The fields produced enough wheat and corn to feed them and sell surplus in Silver Creek. Elias had built a workshop where he made furniture that sold well in town. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable, secure. Lily was 5 now, tall for her age, already learning her letters from the teacher in Silver Creek. Thomas was a sturdy 3-year-old who followed his father everywhere. And in Mara's arms, baby Grace slept peacefully, born just 6 weeks earlier. Elias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and the baby. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Mara looked out at the life they'd built. "I was thinking about that day in Ashford Crossing, when you asked me to save her." "Best decision I ever made." "Best decision we ever made," she corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. "I was nobody, Elias. Nothing. And you saw me anyway. I saw you because you were there, because you said yes when everyone else said no, because you were brave and stubborn and refused to give up." He kissed her softly. "I saw you because you were worth seeing." Lily burst out the door, Thomas tumbling after her, both shrieking with laughter. Lily crashed into Elias's legs while Thomas grabbed Mara's skirt. "Mama, Thomas took my doll." "Did not." "Did too." Elias scooped them both up, one under each arm, making them squeal. "How about we all go inside and have dinner and nobody takes anybody's dolls?" "Okay, Daddy," Lily said, kissing his cheek. They went inside together, the house filled with noise and warmth and life. Mara laid Grace in her cradle and joined her family at the table, looking around at their faces in the lamplight. This was her life now, not the one she'd been born to, not the one circumstances had forced on her, but the one she'd fought for and earned and built with her own hands. She was Mara Rook, wife, mother, landowner, survivor, and she belonged. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Elias added a new entry to the family Bible where he kept their records. Names and dates, births and marriages, the chronicle of their life together. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, he wrote, "Mara Vance Rook, born to nothing, became everything. Mother to our children, heart of our home, owner of this land. May she never forget what she's worth." Mara read it over his shoulder and felt tears prick her eyes. "That's too much," she whispered. "It's not enough," Elias said. "It'll never be enough." He closed the Bible and turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I need you to understand something," he said seriously. "Everything we have, this house, this land, these children, it only exists because you didn't give up. That night with Lily, you could have let her die. You could have walked away, but you didn't. Neither did you. I was desperate. I didn't have a choice. You had the same choice everyone else in that town had. You could have given up, but you kept looking, kept trying until you found someone who'd say yes." Mara touched his face. "We saved each other, Elias. That's the truth of it." He pulled her close, and they stood there in their house, their home, the life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and love and the refusal to quit. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. The cattle lowed softly in the barn. The wind whispered through the pines, and in the valley they'd claimed as their own, the Rook family slept peacefully, safe and together and whole. Mara had been invisible once, forgotten, discarded by a world that saw no value in her. But she'd found her way to a desperate man with a dying baby. And in saving that child, she'd saved herself. Now, years later, surrounded by the family she'd built and the life she'd earned, Mara Rook stood in her home and knew with absolute certainty that she would never be invisible again. She was seen, she was loved, she was essential, she belonged, and that was everything.